Hi and welcome to SBOM Live. And we, in this case, is me, Olle Johansson from Edvina in Sweden, and Anthony. Anthony, who are you?
Hi, hello everyone. Welcome. Anthony Harrison. I write lots of open source software in the world of SBOMs. A consultant, lots of experience of writing complex software. But very keen on helping people manage their software risks now, which is a key demand for many people.
Yeah, and we're doing much of that together within SBOM Europe, where we both have trainings, consultancy, and webinars like this. So the agenda for today is that we'll run a small update from the world of SBOMs and software transparency. Then we'll introduce our guest, Jonathan Meadows. After that, we'll have a brief Q&A session. And we'll close with discussing coming events. So, SBOM updates. The FOSDEM conference, which is the largest open source conference in Europe, possibly the world, has now published most of the program. The dev rooms are definitely published, and both me and Anthony will talk in the SBOM dev room on Sunday, February 2nd. There's also a main track that will be published where I will talk about SBOMs, living the SBOM lifestyle, on Saturday at 3 o'clock in K building. But FOSDEM is where you want to be, and if you check it out, you will add some more links later. There's also something called the Open Source Week with events running the week before the FOSDEM weekend. Eclipse have a large webinar or seminar workshop, something around the Open Regulatory Compliance Working Group, where a lot of open source foundations and projects work together. This is the first in-person meeting, so that's exciting. And Philippe Omredam also have an event, Anthony.
So he's trying to get a group of us who write open source software in sort of the SCA software composition analysis and software quality space, with obviously lots of SBOM world there, trying to get these together and try and sort of harmonize us and sort of move in the same direction, which is very exciting to get so many people in the same place at the same time.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that. In a surprise move, at least for us that's not taking part of the inner workings of the EU Commission and legislation, there was a first update to the Cyber Resilience Act. The Cyber Resilience Act, or CRA, was put into action just before Christmas in the mid-December. But now there's an update for healthcare information systems, looks like journals, that will be part of CRA. Healthcare medical devices has been excluded, but now they brought part of that industry into the CRA, and we will likely see similar additions in the future. I think we see that connected cars in the US have gotten some new requirements on software transparency, and likely that will spread. What do you think?
I think we're going to see the CRA is going to become the sort of a baseline for many systems, and then I think then there will be enhancements for particular sectors.
Yeah.
So healthcare is an
obvious. We already see how other EU legislations point towards the CRA, like NIS2 and DORA, both refer to CRA, and the Red Delegated Act for radio equipment, of course. On another note, I'm the project lead for OWASP Cyclone DX Transparency Exchange API, or Project Koala, and we just restarted the work after the holidays yesterday. And we decided that the T API beta 1 should be ready at the end of this quarter, end of March, with the goal of having some test implementations for OWASP AppSec conference in Barcelona in the end of May. So we are indeed making progress, and we're hoping to see you in Barcelona. If you're more interested in what we're doing in Project Koala, feel free to reach out to me in any of the channels, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, or wherever you can find me.
And that's quite important because that's starting to look at how you share SBOMs of the different formats. So that's why it's a really quite important project.
Oh, yes. In addition, in a surprise move before Christmas, we started to launch our first trainings. There's some information on our website, but more will be coming as we work ourselves through this program. But there are both awareness trainings, shorter trainings for larger teams or the whole company, and half-day trainings, which are more in-depth, and labs and so on. So if you're interested in that, please contact us and we'll present you where we are today and what we can do to help your company. Do we have anything more to add to the news section here, Anthony?
No, that's fine. A lot happening in the background, always is.
We'll explore more of that in coming SBOM Live sessions. So let's move on then to our guest. Hello, Jon, and welcome.
Hi, thanks for inviting me.
So tell me in a few words who you are and what you do in this world.
Yeah, so I'm Jon Meadows. I'm a Citi Tech Fellow here at Citi, and I look after our software supply chain, cloud native engineering, supply chain engineering, AppSec strategy, a whole bunch of things really focusing on securing the organization, particularly focusing on some of those newer attacks and techniques.
And I know
As I understand, sorry, go ahead, Anthony.
I was going to say, and I know you've had some involvement with the OpenSSF and setting some of their strategies and policies forward. Can you explain
absolutely.
How that's
Yeah.
helping?
Yeah, keen supporter of the Open Source Security Foundation. I was until recently on the board and also set up the end user supply working group, trying to bring together a lot of other industry participants so that we can show how we can secure our supply chains at an industry level, and really helping out, bringing out some of the requirements from the enterprise and highlighting some of the threats and techniques that we can bring to bear to help each other out, just within any enterprise really. But I also chair a similar working group at what's referred to as FS-ISAC, which is a financial services information sharing group, where again, I work with other financial institutions just to make people more aware of this as a attack, and try to highlight some of the nuances that might not be apparent to some of my colleagues.
I think it's good to see you sort of focusing from an end user perspective, because I see a lot of the supply chain has been from the generator side, the supplier side. So it's nice to see you at the sort of the end of the chain, so to speak, and then looking upwards. So we probably really, this is where we're going to start in as why the supply chain is of interest. Software supply chain is of interest. So what are you trying to ascertain about the supply chain?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's a huge interest, right? I've really been focusing on it sort of for the last 8 or 9 years, really, and obviously it's been a significant point of interest for many a decade before that as well. But the reality is, I think it's an area where attackers are starting to focus on in a lot more detail. We can see that with some of the reports from Sonatype in the State of Supply Chain report that they produce. There's a significant continued uptick in the amount of attacks, supply chain attacks. There's also a lot of the supply chain attacks that you've perhaps seen in the news as well. So it's an attack that is perhaps seeing more prevalence out there in the sort of threat landscape. And it's one of those situations where, from an attacker's perspective, you can attack one particular place but affect many different customers. So it's an attractive proposition, and certainly one that's a lot of people are looking at. So from an industry standpoint, I think it's really important that financial institutions are aware of that that threat. And as I said earlier, in any enterprise, really, just so you get an understanding of how to perhaps put some mitigations in place, but also start to think a little bit more about your supply chain. Because, you know, with it being a supply chain, you know, there's a link of multiple different companies. It's not just a situation where you are the one and only person in that chain and you can just bring up your drawbridge, you're in great shape. The reality is we all rely upon other enterprises and us and ourselves. So we need to make sure that we're collectively in a more secure position. So it's the combination.
So how are you seeing then? Obviously, that means there's a change in relationships between, you know, from your procurement perspective. How are you seeing that changing, or, you know, over the last 10 years? How have you seen that change, and how have you seen your suppliers respond?
Well, I think, you know, just from the OSSF work, there's certainly a lot of interest now from vendors working with end users, trying to get to a point where vendors and other participants can provide a better understanding of their security state and security posture. So it's easier for enterprises to intuit what their supply chain is like. And similarly, it's certainly more of an interest from these enterprises to get that insight as well. Because the reality is, over the last 10 years, supply chains have become ever more connected and ever more complex. Huge, you know, really nested supply chains that perhaps aren't as obvious initially until you dig in and take a look at, you know, where a lot of the software is coming from and indeed what other contents. So, you know, as you start to look at medium-sized and large-scale businesses, they start to have larger procurement teams that dig in and find out what the supply chain is like. You get some insight into where materials are coming from, and you start to sort of make it visible and get an appreciation of the scale of supply chains, even for some of the medium-sized participants we've had in the OSSF. And I think when you start to see that and see that there's a significant change in complexity, you realize how large that problem is, and then really get an understanding of it. It's going to take a lot to start to mitigate these issues, and really is going to take that community. And that's why I love the open source community so much, is that, you know, we do band together to try and assist and figure out how we can collectively approach some of these challenges. So yeah, it's that never ending complexity, I think, is certainly how it's changed recently.
And I think with, you know, open source is everywhere now, and I think, you know, I think enterprises can't survive without open source. But understanding where that open source is, I think, is a key challenge for many people. So I think if we move on to sort of thinking about how it, you know, we talk about software bill of materials as a way of giving that inventory. So how important are you seeing SBOMs in the work you are doing as an end user, and, you know, what are the challenges you're seeing?
I mean, it's an approach, right? I mean, I think because of the complexity of the problem, the size of the landscape, you know, it's never going to be a single silver bullet, right? And I think it is an element that can be beneficial as you start to look at securing your supply chain. You know, getting a detailed inventory of the products that you use is clearly going to be beneficial. But before you really use that, you need to get an understanding of, you know, the validity of that bill of materials, and also the security posture of the person that's providing it to you. The way that we often talk about it is really looking at the threats model to understand what that threat is, and then go look at the mitigations. And I think there's been a number of threat models published where you can see where you know, an attacker can get into a vendor and what they can perhaps do. And in some cases, you know, it's often the SDLC where an attacker will make the biggest dent in a vendor. at which point they often have the ability to manipulate the SBOM as well as the product. So often we make sure that we recommend our members look at the security posture of the vendor first and foremost, but then look at that SBOM and try to intuit what is in those products. I think in terms of usage, I think it's still at a fairly early stage, I'd say, from an enterprise perspective, for listening to my colleagues as well. That the challenges we see are that the quality of the SBOM still isn't quite where I think it needs to be. I think there's different levels of detail that is provided often. The SBOMs are created at different stages within the SDLC, which is perhaps challenging. So, you know, I see people starting to look at a product and try to generate an SBOM directly from the product in an environment where they can control the outcome and control the capability there as well. So that's really getting an insight into what seems to be within a product and generate their own SBOM. I think many enterprises are using SBOMs, but not as not from a vendor perspective, but internally. You know, creating their own software. Certainly in medium and large enterprises, they have multiple different teams providing components that then used by other teams that are used elsewhere, and getting those teams to themselves generate SBOM in a stable, defined manner means that you can figure out what's in all of the individual software that's created internally within an organization, and then be able to track it back. So you could figure out if there's a particular vulnerability or exploit, for example, and it has been proven to be exploitable, you now know within your own software where that's gone. And I think that's probably a usage of SBOM that's at the forefront within a lot of the enterprises that I see, with the vendor side of things coming up. You'd still use the same inventory internally. It's just that the data hasn't quite caught up to the level where you'd really want to trust it yet. But, you know, it's certainly improving, I think.
I think as an industry, I think the quality of the data is a challenge for so many people. I think the more people use it, the better the data will become, because more people are going to start demanding that. I don't know, I think some of the work OpenSSF and others have been doing is to try and improve that, particularly for the key projects. And I'm sure you've been part of that. And I think, are you seeing, you know, particular things that are common themes that need to be improved particularly, or is it just sort of you know, one ecosystem is, you know, particularly poor on licenses and other ones particularly poor on checksums? I don't know. You know, are you seeing particular themes?
Yeah, I think in general supply chain, I think the thing that can be improved, or one area that I think people need to really get an understanding of, and using SBOMs perhaps to identify it, but is malicious open source software. It's not just the vulnerable software and finding out that a vendor has provided a piece of vulnerable software and you can identify that by the SBOM, but also look to see if there's a malicious piece of open source software. Again, going back to that state of supply chain report, there's a significant growth in the number of malicious or pieces of malicious open source software there, but not that many enterprises or end users that we talk to really understand the implications of that. You know, often sometimes supply chain is a big thing that's difficult to do anything about, or people think that they're in great shape because they've got vulnerability management, whereas the reality is that malicious open source doesn't come with a CVE, right? The attacker is going to create one, right? You're on your own. So there are several different ways and approaches to identify that malicious open source and mitigate it appropriately. And really the initial guidance to many of the enterprises and members there is put something in place where you can start to take a look, right? At least monitor and try to identify that, because you know, we're hearing statistics where you know, enterprises are seeing 2, 3, 4 pieces of malicious software a month. Now, if you then extrapolate that to people within your supply chain, that's obviously getting out there. And then you start to see that coming back through your vendor relationships where someone didn't notice that they'd ingested malicious software and then sent it to you. So then that's perhaps a situation where
sent it to you, signed, verified with a proper SBOM. So
right, exactly. But you know,
Yeah.
then the question becomes, well, thanks for the SBOM, but did you know that this is malicious?
Yeah. That's interesting that the vulnerability management won't help here.
No.
And the scary part is really the amount of energy some of these actors put in. If you read a story behind the XZ, which was one of the bigger ones last year, there are years of preparation, years of working until they almost reach the result. Luckily, they were stopped before they were distributed in the mainstream, but still, there are serious bad actors running these games.
That's right. And I think to your point, I mean, if you think about where the state of the industry is in terms of identifying this behavior and these attacks, there are capabilities out there. There's a huge amount you can do to make end users safer and in a better position. But these attacks continue to evolve, and having an attacker spend 2 years dwelling and then firing off attack, that's incredibly difficult to detect. So people are starting to now really look at resiliency. How can you make your enterprise, your system, your application more resilient to these sort of attacks? It's more than just zero trust. How do you provide a resilient supply chain? And identifying that, and thinking that through is actually quite challenging. It's not just, well, create another supply chain, because that doubles up.
Well,
so
yeah, and there's also kind of mixed messages here that we want people to stay up to date, download almost automatically the latest version of all libraries and tools. On the other hand, in order to stay away from these kind of actions, you may want to stay on the 2-year-old version or something. So it's kind of, we need to fix this and fix a proper communication chain so we can quickly respond when we detect something.
Yeah, there's a balance. I mean, I think I'd recommend people do keep current or relatively current. I mean, 2 years is an awfully long time, and I think vulnerabilities do change whether they're reported or not. So often keeping up to date is still absolutely valid, and just having an appropriate solution in place to look and identify or try to malicious open source software and strengthen that supply chain. And then it can be back to, and I appreciate this is difficult for many to achieve, but really looking in detail at the security posture of vendors, particularly critical vendors, and holding them to account as you map back through your supply chain. Sadly and clearly, that's not scalable for everyone or many people, and you'd focus on the criticals or perhaps smaller businesses are going to be challenged.
But the doing due diligence with your supply chain is a critical part, both of the NIS2 Act and the CRA Act. But the question is how? Where's the guidance? Where are the tools for doing that? That's a very interesting topic. I guess we'll come back to that in many other seminars.
Which I think was very interesting things. Some of the things you're sort of saying about SBOMs I think we're probably familiar with SBOMs being used, say, for vulnerability management, but I think you can also see an SBOM is giving an indication about the I was going to say the SDLC that they're following. How mature is their SDLC? Are they up to date? Are they actually using the content of the SBOM to drive their business to ensure that their customers are being kept secure? I think it sounds like you're seeing some of that yourself. Can you think about, do you think SBOMs have enough information to help that? Should they be maybe extended to have more information about the supplier rather than just the technical side?
It's a tricky one. I mean, sorry, go ahead.
I keep teasing and asking Anthony for we keep discussing, I like metadata, and I want to add that metadata to my internal SBOM. Have I done our due diligence? What's the result? Where can I find it? So I can capture it all in the same kind of data structure.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bit of a war on, isn't there? Do you attach that metadata to the SBOM or have it separately? I'm not gonna get dragged into that one, perhaps, but curating and getting that data is the first part, and getting that understanding so you can make the appropriate decision on whether or not you want to use that vendor. I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah, it's just you often find, probably you have a procurement team has probably got the vendors, they've done some due diligence on that, which is purely probably financial, and you've probably got a technical team who've done something purely technical. But sometimes you need sort of pull those two together, and it's the oversight and the governance, and that sort of falls between the lines in the silos. And yeah, it's really an organizational challenge as much as it's as a formatting challenge. But it's just you're a large organizations, you can probably communicate. Smaller organizations, it's probably more of a challenge, and that was. Yeah,
it's not just an SPDX, cyclone DX issue, certainly not. I mean, it really is third-party risk management in all of its forms. As you're saying, whether it's the finance, whether it's the contract, whether it's the license, whether it's the vulnerability management, there's the security element of it, there's the security posture, financial and commercial, and all of it provides input into that decision about whether or not that's an appropriate third party. I think there's a lot of data out there from the energy sector and the military sector of the work that they go into and the depths they go into to look at their third parties. And I think that's often an interesting angle to that. You can see some of the insights evident in the SBOM, as you were saying, Anthony, as well. Some of the basic ones. Frankly, can the vendor provide an SBOM? If they can't provide an SBOM, it identifies a level of maturity right there. If they do provide an SBOM, but it's full of outdated software, that gives you the other sort of hint that there's an issue, and it sort of gives details back onto their SDLC even before you go and have a detailed conversation with them or try to get some direct reports out of their abstracted reports out of their SDLC and have those detailed conversations.
What I would love to do is to ask a vendor, say, can you have an SBOM? And their answer comes out, which format and which type of SBOM do you want? Do you want a build one, a source one? And that will show a maturity and an understanding. I think it's, we're a long way off that as a standard in industry. But that's where I would love to be. What color would you like? It becomes, they have those options. But
that's right.
Or have them all published using the Transparency Exchange API, of course.
Yeah. I know you spent, one of the things that you were heavily involved in was the OWASP dependency track and sort of scaling that. Can you sort of explain how you got involved in that? Because obviously you're using SBOMs in a particular way. It was great you sort of helping stuff for the community. What was your motivation, and what have you achieved?
Yeah, well, I'm very invested in the open source community. We are part of the open source community, as hopefully many other enterprises are as well, right? And I think there's an area where working with Steve and team, there were conversations around, look, how can we contribute back? I think everyone should contribute back from just as a matter of course, really. So it was looking at how we can partner up and provide additional assistance to building out the capability and product. And as we looked at areas we can help with some of our expert engineers, there were conversations to be had about how we could scale it even further. So working directly with the excellent team out there, we were able to put some work into to really help scale dependency track into something that you could really have running to ingest internal SBOMs or external at a relatively high rate of knots. If you think about how often SBOMs could potentially change if you have large enterprises consuming a lot of products, or even if you're using internally that for some of your internal management, the sheer number of SBOMs and VEX data elements is going to be quite a challenge. So trying to help out by making sure that it scales appropriately was definitely something that we were more than happy to help and continue to help towards today. Great project, great group, OWASP team, as well as the OSSF and many others. So happy to work together on that.
Yeah, and it's obviously, it's a key tool for SBOMs, and it's great to see people sort of adopting it. It's widely adopted from when the conversation.
Yep. And I'm very excited about the upcoming version, the hiatus that provide this scalability you're talking about. The things we've seen so far has been a dramatic change in the capacity of dependency track.
Yep.
So if you're interested, there are community meeting videos on YouTube, dependency track community meetings, where they made presentations about the coming version. So stay up to date with that.
So I think we sort of move towards our final question, which is sort of, where do you see the future of the supply chain? You've obviously spent a lot of the last 10 years sort of wrestling with it. Where would you see it as going forward in the next couple of years? Let's not be too adventurous about where we will be in 10 years' time. Where do you see the future?
Well, I think it's important to figure out where the scale of the problem we're facing, right? And often we say SBOM or software supply chain, but I think it's important to understand that there's multiple levels of software supply chain, right? We often think about, well, it's the open source of software supply chain. Where's my open source and where's my SBOM? But the reality is you have, at the top layer, perhaps the open source layer, open source supply chain and the open source software you're using. The one below, perhaps vendor software that you're bringing in that itself could have open source in it. Below that, hardware with embedded software in it, how you function with that. Around the same level, AI ML models and how the supply chains around that are handled. Then telecoms, networking, power. I mean, there's just multiple stacks of supply chain. So once you think you're familiar and comfortable with one layer, wait till you see the next one. And I think it's really getting an understanding of how you can start to mitigate some of these issues and get an understanding of that supply chain all the way down, or as far down as you can reasonably go when you balance the risk versus reward there. So I think in terms of where it'll be going next, I think that depth of making sure that we bolster the AI ML supply chain, particularly. I think there's new potential threats and attacks there. If you look at some of the AI ML work, and there's some great work being put together by the community there at the moment, but also looking at how we can get vendors to provide more details, appropriate levels of details, even under escrow, about their security posture, whether that includes the SBOM, but also the SBOM plus the metadata that Olle is looking for to give you an insight of, look, this is, the general security posture of my SDLC machinery, and this is what it currently looks like, all the security posture and implications. And that, identified infrastructure is what provided the software. You can validate that it did so. You can validate that the software itself is non-vulnerable or within limits. And you can also validate that the SBOM also came from that infrastructure that was itself secured. And getting that level of metadata in a signed form consistently from multiple vendors, I think that's where really we want to head from a future standpoint. So it's one of those situations where it'll be going left and right at each individual level and continue deeper down as you go through open source vendor, AI, ML, hardware, and such.
Yeah, it's turtles all the way down, hey?
Yeah.
It is, but the great thing is we're talking about it, and it's been socialized a lot more now.
But
people are aware.
I see that. Yeah, I see that OpenSSF have developed scorecards and best current practice badges, but those apply to open source project. But listening to you, seems like we need something along that way for commercial vendors as well, or?
Well, there are multiple schemes out there already to validate the security posture of companies and vendors, many of them. And it's really just to ensure that people continue to keep up to that sort of threshold in the mark. But I think what I'm referring to is having a codified way of exchanging the outcome and details of that, rather than every year or two saying, yes, I'm definitely compliant with this, compliant with that, or SSDF compliant, which is a great standard, by the way. But what we'd like to shift to perhaps is, look, this is real time, or this is last week's update that told you that, yep, we are still in compliance with NIST SSDF and these other different compliance standards, just to give you more comfort and understanding of the true security posture of that vendor. It's not just a statement based upon trust, but it's a statement based upon data and evidence that you can then validate. Yeah. That's where you want to shift it.
This is where the Cyclone DX attestation part comes in to play, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very much like, people do a pen test once a year. Well, for 364 days, you are sort of unknown, and really we need to get to this continual monitoring of the supply chain in all aspects. And okay, it's a baseline. Clearly, you need a baseline, but actually, you need to sort of monitor that baseline and how that baseline changes. As you say, new threats appear, new vulnerabilities appear, vendors change, the risk profiles of vendors change. It's pulling all those together and having those oversights ready on demand when you need it, and and it will take time, clearly.
And that's where I think security controls are moving towards, right? And perhaps driven by more of the cloud functionality. It doesn't need to be cloud in any way, but the ability to have continuous control validation using certain software, but extending that to the rest of your enterprise. I think that's really going to be valuable, and where we should be heading.
So I think that's been really useful insights, John. Thank you for that.
I would like to say thank you, John, for participating.
No worries.
You put a lot of new thoughts in my head, and I'm looking forward to coming back to you in the future sometime and check up what's the state of the supply chain here.
Yeah, please do. And thanks again for having me. I think the more we talk about this, the easier we can all work together to find a solution. So always open to further conversations.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that some of the work you've done as an end user encourages more end users to start seeing the value that you can get. And, because I think I want 2025 to be the year of the end user for SBOMs and the supply chain, because that's going to benefit everybody. So,
yeah.
I also appreciate that you keep using the word community. There's a lot of things here that we can only solve by working together. And that's what me and Anthony are trying to spearhead here in Europe.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much.
No worries. Thanks for your time.
So we're moving on, Anthony. We have a couple of coming events. We mentioned FOSDEM at fosdem.org. That's going to be a very, very cool meeting place, and there's more and more focus every year on software supply chain security. This year we have an SBOM dev room, we have a security dev room, and we have a couple of dev rooms for European policymakers and the legislation and other things. So there are a lot of interesting sessions here. And of course, the best part of this is Anthony's talk in the SBOM dev room, my talk in the SBOM dev room, and my talk in the main track.
And
any doubt about this?
And I was going to say, it's all live streamed as well. There are over 1,000 talks, I think, across 2 days. So it's a very, very busy time. We can't get to every talk that you want to. So watch it live streamed or watch it on demand in the weeks after the event.
And the conference is all free. That's very exciting and a great opportunity to meet up with the projects you work on, the project you depend on. All of the developers are there, so you can ask the right questions and get proper answers. This is really the place to be in February. And FOSDEM is now part of a bigger chain of events. It has been for many years. We used to call them FOSDEM Fringe events, but now they're labeled EU Open Source Week. So on that website, opensourceweek.eu, you can find a lot of fringe events. The Eclipse Open Regulatory Compliance Working Group meetings, Linux Foundation inviting you to drinks on the Saturday. Many communities have separate meetings like Matrix and DuckDB and other open source projects. They hook a meeting up on the before or after FOSDEM. So that's going to be an interesting week, I think. And we are going to be on site, of course, and record live interviews. That's going to be the next SBOM Live, number 5, where we meet people on the software supply chain agenda and discuss where we are with SBOMs and software supply chain security. I also wanted to mention my conference, the Nordic Software Security Summit. We had the first event last year, and we're now starting planning for the fall event in October this year. I'm open for ideas, suggestions. I've started discussion with a couple of sponsors. So if you have any ideas, proposals, or want to be part of this, please contact me as well. The website is nsss.se, many S's. Any other things we need to mention here, Anthony?
There's the Open Source Week is primarily in Brussels, but there's also an event in London on the Tuesday, State of OpenCon, Tuesday and Wednesday, the 4th and 5th of February in London, where quite a lot of people will just get the train from Brussels and go to London. It's a slightly different, it's not just a technical, it's quite a lot of sort of policy compliancy type things as well. So it's a slightly different audience. Again, it's good to be part of that carry on the discussions. The UK is a major contribution of open source in Europe. So it's good to be part of that community as well if you're around.
Okay. So with that, we say thank you for participating today, and we're hoping to see you soon. Please follow us on LinkedIn or YouTube, and now also on Blue Sky. Thank you and goodbye.
Bye.